According to the Vision 2030 Greetings and welcome back to our Understanding Democracy conversations right here on Zimbabwe Daily. My name is Yvonne Muchaka and it is a pleasure to be back with you once again. So today we are looking at constitutionalism and the electoral system challenges and opportunities. So when we look at the Electoral Act, the authority to govern derives from the will of the people demonstrated through elections that are conducted efficiently, freely, fairly, transparently, and properly on the basis of universal and equal suffrage exercised through a secret ballot, and that every citizen has the right to participate in government directly through freely chosen representatives and is entitled without distinction on the ground of race, ethnicity, gender, language, political or religious beliefs, education, physical appearance or disability, economic or social condition to stand for office and to cast a vote freely, to join or participate in the activities of and to recruit members of a political party of his or her choice, to participate in peaceful political activity intended to influence the composition and policies of government, to participate through civic organization in peaceful activities to influence and challenge the policies of government. And the Act provides for political party rights as well as candidate rights. So today, as we look at this topic, I have in studio the Executive Director, Rosalind Hanzi, coming through from the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Excellent. And we also have coming through from the WALPE, the Women's Academy. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you,
Right. You are the monitoring and evaluation officer at WALPE.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Okay. Like for work or just generally?
Just in general, who are you?
Okay, my name is Margaret Zinhumwe, and I'm the monitoring and evaluation officer for Women's Academy for Leadership and Political Excellence.
Excellent. Now, as we go into this conversation, I'm going to start with you as I come to you, Director Hanzi. Zach announced there's nomination fees coming through, and there's been a lot of cry from different political actors. What is your view as WALPE?
Okay, as WALPE, our main role is to identify, mobilize, capacitate women who want to participate and take up leadership positions. So the recently gazetted prize is like a header to these women, because you might find that most of them they have the right qualities to be leaders, but then they don't have the resources enough to pay these fees.
Right.
And also, like historically, women have been sidelined in the economic activities. And this current hike is like a clap in the face, because most of them, they're now made to choose between fending for their families and taking part in the political activities. So they now have to decide whether they will take care of their families or participate in the political activities. And also, this current hike is not a true reflection of our current economic situation in Zimbabwe, because as we look at it, 77% of the employed people in Zimbabwe earn between 20,000 and below. And most of women that we work with, they are in the informal sector. So they don't really have much of this money to pay for their candidature.
Right.
And also, this may also give rise to sexual abuse, as some of the women might opt to give sexual favors in the exchange of like payment of these fees.
Right. And that takes away the right of the woman to actually participate freely in the electoral process. So I'll come to you, Rosalind Hanzi. The constitution is very difficult for a lot of people to actually consume. So it's one document that has been ignored over time. Now, when we look at the electoral processes that we have in Zimbabwe, what would you say are the challenges that we actually have with our constitution?
Well, I just want to start off by saying that comparing to the
You may want to
constitution,
come in a bit closer to the mic.
comparing to the constitution that we had its independence,
Yeah.
which we commonly refer to as the Lancaster House Constitution.
Yeah.
The constitution that we have now, it's not a perfect document, but it's more progressive in that
Right.
it has more progressive provisions around establishing strong institutions if it's followed. It has a broader Bill of Rights, and it also has an elaborate section dealing with the electoral system,
Right.
basically. It also includes, in Section 67, what we call political rights, and it sets out what that right entails. It also makes it very clear in terms of the obligation
Right.
of ZEC. So I would say that as a foundation and starting point, we do have a good constitution. But the challenge that we now have is that this constitution came about when we already had existing laws, many laws that
Yeah.
were existing. So it's the supreme law of the country. It's the highest law. So there was an obligation on government to then make sure that all the laws are aligned to ensure that there's no contradiction between the lower laws with the highest law of the land.
Right.
And unfortunately, what we then tend to see is that some of the laws, particularly those relating to electoral issues, have not been aligned. This is despite the fact that the Constitution came about we are almost getting into 10 years now. And of course, we as lawyers, particularly human rights lawyers, would say there's no political will to
Right.
align certain laws with the Constitution.
Right. People always say that the constitution or the law rather is subject to interpretation. Does the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission have the right, if I may put it that way, to actually gazette nomination fees for the holding of an election? Maybe you may need to enlighten us on that.
I would say in terms of the Constitution, there are certain powers that the Electoral Commission has.
Right.
But if we look at our system in Zimbabwe, there are certain powers that the Electoral Commission does not have, like gazetting laws, but in other countries, they have more power.
Okay.
In Zimbabwe, what we have is a system where most of the laws are either passed by parliament or they can only be gazetted by a minister. So we have certain ministers that are in charge of administering certain laws. But what we have been pushing for is saying that if we look at the mandate of the Electoral Commission in the Constitution, then they should have certain powers to do certain things,
Right.
without necessarily involving the minister. Because what we are looking at is, we call the constitutional commissions, which is what the Zimbabwe Election Commission is, key institutions that should be there to support democracy.
Right.
And
Yeah.
for them to be effective, they also have to be independent. So this business of saying that the Electoral Commission, for instance, cannot appear before Parliament and present their report is a problem to us, where they have to go through a certain minister to present their report, because
Okay.
they cannot do so in terms of the processes that are there.
I see.
So for us to have a more effective, independent, and efficient Electoral Commission, they should be able to determine some of the things.
All right. Wow, there's really some amazing insights that are coming through there. So what we're going to try and do is to take a short break. And when we come back, we continue this conversation. Thank you so much for tuning in. So we're just going to take a short break. And when we come back, we continue this conversation. What rights what role and what placement do we have with the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission as we look towards 2023 harmonized election? Join us after this short break. All right, so welcome back. We are talking constitutionalism and the electoral system challenges and opportunities. Rosalind Hanzi was talking about the challenges that we already have and that we are facing when it comes to the independence of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, the fact that it has to appear before a minister and not appear before parliament as an entity that is representing the people. So now I want to come back to you, my dear, and ask this a question: that when you go out into the field and you talk to women who want to really be a part of the whole electoral processes, being in leadership positions within their communities, do you feel like the women feel that their rights can and are protected within the Constitution, and especially when looking at the activities of ZAC?
Okay, so looking from the experiences in the field, the women feel like their rights are not protected because for them, they feel like sex should be independent enough to regulate the party conduct. Because you might find that some women are actually ready to take part in these political positions, but come the primary elections, they are all trimmed, and then we get 2 women out of maybe 50 were vying for the same positions,
Right.
and that position will be given to men. And also, ZEC should also regulate the party conduct, make sure that there's no violence, make sure that there is no vote buying, because vote buying doesn't equalize the playing field. because if you look at it, women are on the disadvantaged side of the economic.
Right.
Yes.
Spectrum,
So they don't have that much resources to buy votes, to buy things that entice the voters. And also they feel like ZEC is not giving like the media that power to properly advertise women, to properly air women, especially on the mainline medias.
Right. There's an aspect that I really wanted us to touch on, and that is the issue of a violent response to people when they put themselves out there and say, I want to stand as a candidate, be it MP, be it council, or even president, right? And do you feel like the Constitution or the Electoral Commission is empowered enough to actually deal with the electoral violence, political violence that we see each time we start going towards election? I mean, for the last 5 years, Zimbabwe has been in a perennial, election mode. So we've seen the violence rearing its ugly head. Do you feel like ZEC should have some powers to deal with that? Does it have the powers to do? I think Roslyn can actually help us there to say, does ZEC have the power to deal with issues to do with violence or electoral misconduct according to the act?
The Electoral Act establishes what we call multi-party liaison committees. And basically, these are supposed to be constituted involving all the political parties. And ZEC has a role to ensure that those are constituted. And I do understand that the gap that is there, sometimes they constitute them at the national level, and they're not constituting them at the district level, at the provincial level, which is what is needed.
Right.
Because basically the violence does not happen, nationally, like at some very high level place. It happens
At the grassroots,
at the ward, in the villages. That's where it's happening, at the village level, at the district level. So it's something that needs to be worked on. And also to ensure that these multi-party liaison committees are always constituted, because normally you then tend to find them constituted just before the elections. And all this time, we know how deeply polarized our society is.
Right. It's not going to change anytime soon.
Unfortunately, the challenge that we do have is that we've been calling for electoral reforms.
Right.
Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights is a member of the Zimbabwe Election Support Network. And we've been calling for electoral reforms way before the 2013 Constitution.
Right.
After the 2013 Constitution, then we looked at the Constitution and said, okay, fine, let's look at the Constitution. It now has a chapter on the electoral system, which is elaborate.
Okay.
It sets out the principles, what should be followed, what should be done. And then we also have this chapter, which has all the commissions, including the Zimbabwe Election Commission, with more power.
Right.
So we have been pushing for those electoral reforms. But I think for those that follow the developments, and some of the political parties, some of them have said, do you think we are going to reform ourselves out of power?
Right.
So the challenge is the political will.
All right. So we do have a constitution that is progressive. We have acts and sections that are really, really good, but the challenge is in the implementation. Right, Zimbabwe, we're coming to you live on Zimbabwe Daily. Would want to hear your own views and your own take when it comes to the issues to do with constitutionalism and the electoral system. Are we ever going to get to a point where we can say we are now enjoying the benefits of that one man, one vote mantra that was fought for during the liberation struggle? So, Rose, I'm going to really point out a lot more on your side, because I really want to understand this challenge. So we have documents that lays out the proper thing, and you say the problem is the political will. So what can we do?
Yeah, it's a big challenge, I think. And I would really want to maybe get out of my comfort zone as a lawyer, because you want me to talk about the Constitution. But I want to go back and start talking about what I think has not really been done.
Right.
Before 1980, we were under colonial rule. And then there was a liberation struggle that was fought for us to have that universal suffrage, the one adult, one vote, for us to enjoy the rights as Zimbabweans. And then come independence. Of course, it was a negotiated settlement, the Lancaster House. So there were negotiations in terms of, sunset clauses, what can be done, what cannot be done. At that time, in terms of the other area that has been emerging and evolving over the years, there was need for us to implement what we call proper transitional justice mechanisms that are sequenced properly. And transitional justice mechanisms are quite mutually reinforcing to each other. So you have to sequence them properly. There are quite a number of them. There's memorialization, there's accountability and justice, there's healing, there's institutional reforms. And I think one of the gaps that we actually have is that since independence, and as we moved from colonial rule to what we thought was going to be, democracy, majority rule.
Yeah.
In terms of sequencing, we really didn't sequence them well because, of course, there were negotiations and sunset clauses.
Right.
But also because maybe there was also no political will. So you then tend to find that we have these institutions that were used to violating rights before independence that then adopt the same culture after independence. Because there was not much institutional transformation. And this could have been done by screening, vetting, lustrating. That's when sometimes you see when people are comparing what's happening now in terms of even just the general issues that are affecting everyone, police brutality,
right,
brutality by the military. You then tend to find that they compare with what happened before independence and say, but honestly, how are we being brutalized by a government that is supposed to be supporting us?
Right.
Because so many people died for that independence. But now it's like it's a repeat cycle. So in terms of institutional reforms and sequencing of transitional justice processes, there was a big gap. That's why even today you still hear issues around Gukura, which happened after independence.
Right.
Because the institutions that were involved were never really reformed properly. So they adopted the culture before and just thought we can just continue as usual. And then after Gukura, nothing happens again because there's no will to implement transitional justice processes. And if they're implemented properly and sequenced properly, then you can start moving towards a more democratic society.
Right. Wow. Wow. Institutional reform didn't take place. There was no proper sequencing around transitional justice mechanisms. Do you feel the same?
I feel the same, especially
you're a young lady and you're hearing everyone talk about what happened in the 1980s. We had, it was like an elaborate campaign happening on social media, that hashtag Smith was better, What's your take? And how do you feel about that?
Okay, what I feel is for the youths, they're kind of comparing to the current situation to what was then before. Probably it goes back to what she was saying. There was no proper procedures that were done. Maybe that's the thing that we need. We need to sit down, go back, then say, how are we going to really do it? How are we going to implement? Because we have the progressive laws. How are we going to implement in a way that makes sense and make sure that democracy prevails?
How long does that take?
Yeah, that's the question. Still, it's worth it. Try.
Yeah. Just as we round off this conversation, because we don't want it to drag on and on and on, we know the problems. And now, as I sit here, I'm cringing, because you raised this fundamental issue of the lack of political will. To a lay person, can you draw them in to talk about what political will would do to our electoral environment?
I would say that if we had political will, we would have an enabling electoral act that ensures that if there are many political parties that want to participate, they're able to do so without hindrance. That is aligned to the Constitution to ensure that the Electoral Commission is able to act independently. As envisaged in the Constitution, it says it should be independent without influence from anyone. By that, I'm even saying that the Electoral Commission should be able to come up with some of these regulations without them having to be put through some other member of the three arms of government, like the executive, the minister.
Right.
If there was political will, candidates of political parties would actively go out and ensure that they influence changes in the culture. Zimbabwe is almost like perpetually in electoral mode.
Right.
Elections, we always say, are not an event, they're a process. And I do believe that political will entail candidates going out and ensuring that they promote peace and unity in the communities. People should understand that there's this multi-party democracy concept.
Right.
And how does it happen? They should also understand that we have a Bill of Rights, which talks about certain rights in terms of political rights, freedom
Right.
of expression, freedom of association.
It's
So
all
if
good on
I'm
paper.
associating with the political party X and you associate with Y, we should be able to live together.
Right.
And they should also understand that where there's multi-party democracy, where there are many political parties, and even if one takes on power, the party that is ruling or governing, it will be kept on its toes because there are other alternative voices that are critiquing it in a constructive manner in terms of how to improve governance
Right.
of the country, how to improve the democracy of the country, and how to change the lives of the ordinary person. But the challenge is that is they continue to say, some of them, we will not reform ourselves out of power.
Right.
And unfortunately, the challenge that we have is that when people are elected into office, I think what I've noticed is that they think that it then comes with privileges. You have to have certain goodies.
Yeah.
You have to have certain privileges, rights, their passports. They don't understand that when you are elected into office, you are there to serve the people.
Right.
You are elected by someone to represent their interests, not to represent your
Your
interests.
personal interest.
That's where the challenge is. The culture of understanding what does it entail to be a candidate, to be a leader. That is saying I'm standing on behalf of a constituency. That is where the problem is.
But now I'm asked to pay $1,000, so I have to regain it after the election.
I think what we've seen in other countries is that if you look at some of the Western democracies, there are countries where, like Sweden and other countries, where parliamentarians don't get those vehicles, those 4x4 vehicles.
Right.
They travel by public transport. Some of them even cycle to work. I've seen some ministers in Netherlands, for instance, cycling to work because they know they're there to serve.
The people.
They are not there to benefit or to loot, as what others would say.
Right. And when you train your ladies in the rural communities, in the urban centers and stuff like that, do you give them that? Do you make them come to life? Do you make it alive to them that they are there to serve people, and that, just go in there for a period and come out and allow other people to go in? Because I think that's where we have a problem. We have a problem of people who are perennially in parliament. It's like a career. What's your career? I'm an MP. What do you tell the ladies vis-a-vis our electoral system?
All right. So as for us, in terms of representation, we make sure like during our trainings we have a module, and like for WALPE, our model is like an inverted ladder where we buttress on the fact that we capacitate you, you take up leadership position. So when you reach the height, you have to go back down to the people who elected you. You have to represent them. You have to represent their needs. You have to go back to them, make sure that they're enjoying the rights of their communities. They're enjoying the resources of their communities. They're enjoying the fact that you are in the parliament. You are there for them.
Right.
Yes.
And I guess that's what we need, people who represent the people. Rosalind Hanzi, director, thank you so much that in your busy schedule, you could actually be in studio with us to talk to us about the rights that we have in our constitution.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a pleasure to be able to share, and also to be able to share the platform with a young lady. They call them Mama 2000.
Yes. Margaret, thank you so much for also giving us insight into the work that you're doing as Women's Academy for Leadership and Political Excellence. I always mix that up. Stadewa will be on my case, but all the same, thank you so much to WALPE. Thank you so much to Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights for the work that you're doing. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in right here on Zimbabwe Daily. You know, we value your comments, we value your questions, we value your contributions to the work that we are doing. At the end of the day, we want to be able to fully participate in our electoral processes, knowing that the Constitution protects me. So go and register to vote, young people. Let us go in our numbers. Let's make sure that we also support members of our community to go and register to vote. It is your right. It is enshrined in the Constitution, and we need to begin to take active interest in what happens in our nation. So this has been Frank Talk with me, Yvonne, and we are in our series Understanding Democracy, and we were talking constitutionalism and the electoral system, challenges and opportunities. Let us all participate. Let us all hold hands together and make sure that the politicians we put on our positions of authority are held accountable, and that we go back to the drawing board to rebuild Zimbabwe. This is Zimbabwe Daily. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of day.